It's funny how the most life-changing moments can happen on what starts as a perfectly normal day. We were on our annual family vacation in Cape Cod, a tradition my grandmother had started when I was just 5 years old. The morning had been perfect: warm sunshine, salty breeze, and the familiar smell of my grandmother's coffee cake baking in the rental house's tiny kitchen. Where are you watching from today? Comment down below. I remember sitting on the deck, watching the waves crash against the shore, when my brother Jake came running out, complaining about being bored. He was 24, same as me, but sometimes I felt decades older. Grandma had just smiled at him, the way she always did, and suggested he help her at the store later that afternoon. "There's always work to be done," she'd say. But Jake just rolled his eyes and went back inside to play video games. That was the last conversation I ever heard my grandmother have. They said it was quick, a sudden heart attack while she was taking her afternoon nap. One moment she was there, the matriarch of our family, the woman who had built Miller's General Store from nothing into a chain of successful convenience stores across 3 states, and the next, she was gone. Just like that, the center of our family's universe disappeared. I couldn't process it at first. This was the woman who had taught me everything I knew about business, about life, really. Every summer since I was 12, I'd worked at her flagship store. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I loved watching her work, the way she knew every regular customer by name, how she could look at the inventory and know exactly what needed to be ordered, the gentle but firm way she handled difficult customers. Jake had never understood that. To him, the stores were just ATMs, places that generated money he could spend. He'd worked there exactly once, for 3 days, before quitting, because it was beneath him. Grandma never forced him to come back. "Some people have to learn their own way," she'd say. But I could see the disappointment in her eyes. The days after her death passed in a blur. The vacation house felt hollow, like all the warmth had been sucked out of it. Mom and Dad were busy with funeral arrangements, talking in hushed tones about lawyers and paperwork. Jake spent most of his time on his phone, occasionally making comments about how we needed to modernize the business. I wanted to scream at him that he knew nothing about the business, but I couldn't find the energy. Instead, I found myself sitting in Grandma's favorite spot on the deck, remembering all the early morning conversations we'd had there. She'd tell me stories about starting the business in the 1980s, working 18-hour days while raising my dad. "Nothing worth having comes easy," she'd say, her eyes twinkling. "But that's what makes it worth having." The funeral was held back home, and it seemed like half the town showed up. Everyone had a story about my grandmother, how she'd extended credit during hard times, how she'd given their teenager their first job, how she'd remembered their children's names years after they'd moved away. Each story was like a piece of a puzzle, showing me just how much impact one person could have on a community. Jake spent most of the funeral service texting. When people came up to share their condolences, he'd barely look up from his phone. Mom kept making excuses for him. "He processes grief differently," she'd say. But I knew the truth. He wasn't grieving, he was planning. I overheard him later that night talking to Mom and Dad about his inheritance and all the big plans he had. It made me sick to my stomach. Grandma's body wasn't even cold, and he was already thinking about how to spend her money. But I told myself to stay calm. After all, Grandma had always been fair. She wouldn't have left everything to Jake. She knew him too well for that. Looking back now, I wish I'd paid more attention to the way Mom and Dad exchanged glances during that conversation. I wish I'd noticed how they carefully steered me away whenever Jake started talking about his plans. I wish I'd realized that the comfortable, secure feeling I had about my future was about to be shattered into a million pieces. But hindsight is always crystal clear, isn't it? And sometimes, the hardest lessons come from the people who are supposed to protect you the most. 2 weeks after the funeral, we gathered in Mr. Peterson's law office for the reading of the will. I remember how the leather chairs squeaked uncomfortably as we shifted in our seats, waiting for him to begin. Jake couldn't even be bothered to wear a proper suit. He showed up in jeans and a wrinkled button-down, still glued to his phone. Mr. Peterson, who had been Grandma's lawyer for over 30 years, cleared his throat and began reading. His voice was steady, professional, but I caught him glancing at me several times as he spoke. Now I understand why. The initial terms seemed fair, exactly what I'd expected from Grandma. Her estate, including the business and all assets, was to be split equally between Jake and me. But then came the catch, the detail that would change everything. Our parents were appointed as trustees until both Jake and I turned 30, supposedly to ensure the continued success of the business. I felt a slight unease at this revelation, but pushed it aside. After all, these were my parents. They would handle everything fairly, right? Looking back, I should have noticed how Dad couldn't meet my eyes, how Mom kept fidgeting with her wedding ring, a nervous habit she'd had since I was little. Jake, on the other hand, suddenly perked up. For the first time that day, he put his phone down. "This is perfect," he announced, not even waiting for Mr. Peterson to finish. "I've been doing research on tech startups, and I have some amazing ideas for modernizing the business." I remember feeling my stomach drop. The business didn't need modernizing. It was already successful, running on the solid principles Grandma had established over decades. But before I could say anything, Mom and Dad were nodding enthusiastically. "That's wonderful, honey," Mom exclaimed, while Dad started talking about moving with the times. Mr. Peterson's face remained carefully neutral, but I saw something like concern flash across his features. After the reading, Jake couldn't stop talking about his plans. He wanted to revolutionize the convenience store industry with some kind of app. He threw around buzzwords like blockchain and AI integration, clearly having no idea what they actually meant. The worst part was watching our parents hang on his every word. When I tried to ask practical questions about market research, development costs, implementation timelines, Mom cut me off. "Don't be such a pessimist," she said. "Your brother is showing real initiative here." That evening, I went to Dad's study to discuss the inheritance arrangement more thoroughly. I wanted to understand exactly how the trustee system would work, how decisions would be made about the business. But his answers were vague, evasive. "Don't worry about it right now," he kept saying. "We'll figure everything out as we go." I pressed harder, asking specifically about protecting Grandma's business model. "Well," Dad hedged, not meeting my eyes, "we need to be open to new ideas. Times are changing." That's when Jake burst in, practically bouncing with excitement. He'd apparently spent the afternoon watching tech entrepreneurship videos on YouTube and had even more revolutionary ideas. Dad immediately turned his full attention to Jake, effectively ending our conversation. Over the next few days, I noticed a pattern. Whenever I tried to discuss the inheritance or the business, my parents would change the subject or suddenly remember urgent errands. But they spent hours listening to Jake's increasingly grandiose plans. The final red flag came when I overheard Mom on the phone with someone, discussing investment opportunities. When I walked into the room, she quickly hung up. "Just talking to an old friend," she said, but her voice was pitched higher than normal. Another telltale sign she was lying. I tried telling myself I was being paranoid. These were my parents, after all. They wouldn't do anything to harm my inheritance, right? But there was a knot forming in my stomach, a nagging feeling that something was very wrong. Looking back, all the signs were there. The way they shielded Jake from any criticism, how they dismissed my concerns as negativity, their sudden interest in innovative investment opportunities. They were already plotting, already figuring out how to funnel my inheritance to their precious son. But I wasn't ready to accept that truth yet. I still believed in family, in fairness, in doing the right thing. I still thought my parents would honor Grandma's wishes and protect both our interests equally. I was about to learn just how wrong I was. A month after the will reading, Jake called an emergency family meeting in our parents' living room. He had prepared a PowerPoint presentation, if you could call it that. The slides were a mess of clip art and random tech jargon, but he stood there beaming like he'd just invented electricity. "I call it Smart Shop AI," he announced proudly. "It's going to revolutionize the entire convenience store industry." The basic idea, as far as I could understand it, was to replace all the cashiers with some kind of artificial intelligence system. There would be cameras everywhere, and customers would just walk in, grab what they wanted, and walk out. The AI would automatically charge their accounts. I sat there watching my parents nod along enthusiastically, feeling like I was in some kind of bizarre alternate reality. This was the business my grandmother had built from nothing. A business built on personal connections, on knowing customers by name, on being part of the community. And Jake wanted to turn it into some kind of soulless, automated shopping pod. "What about Mrs. Henderson?" I asked, thinking of the elderly widow who came in every morning to buy her newspaper and chat with the cashiers. Or Mr. Rodriguez, who needs help reading labels because of his failing eyesight. Are they supposed to navigate an app? Mom shot me a warning look. "Your brother is thinking about the future," she said. "We can't stay stuck in the past." Jake continued his presentation, throwing around cost estimates that were clearly pulled from thin air. He had no idea about licensing fees, software development costs, or infrastructure requirements. When I tried to point this out, Dad cut me off. "The details can be worked out later. The important thing is the vision." The vision, as it turned out, required just a small initial investment of $2 million. $2 million of our inheritance, money that was supposed to be protected until we turned 30. But somehow our parents had already found a way around that restriction. "We've been talking to some financial advisors," Mom explained, not quite meeting my eyes. "They think this is a wonderful opportunity. Very forward-thinking." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Have any of you actually talked to our customers? Asked them if they want this? Or checked if similar systems have been successful in other small-town markets? "God, you're such a buzzkill," Jake snapped. "This is why you'll never be successful. You're too scared to take risks. Grandma took risks when she started the business. Grandma took calculated risks based on years of retail experience and actual market research," I shot back. "She didn't watch a few YouTube videos and decide to completely overhaul a successful business model." "That's enough!" Dad's voice was sharp. "Your brother has shown initiative and creativity. The least you could do is be supportive." I looked around the room at these people who were supposed to be my family and felt completely alone. They were all looking at me like I was the problem, like my practical concerns were just negativity holding back Jake's genius. Later that evening, I tried one last time to reason with Mom in the kitchen. "Look, I'm not against modernizing," I explained. "But we need to do proper market research. Start with a small pilot program maybe, test the waters." "Why are you always trying to hold your brother back?" she interrupted. "He has such big dreams, and all you do is try to clip his wings. I thought we raised you better than that." I stood there, stunned by the unfairness of it all. "This isn't about dreams, Mom. This is about protecting Grandma's legacy. The business is successful because your grandmother wasn't afraid to try new things." Mom's voice was getting that shrill edge it always did when she was defending Jake. "Times change. We need to adapt." I gave up trying to argue. It was clear they had already made up their minds. Jake was the visionary, the golden child who could do no wrong, and I was just the negative Nancy trying to rain on his parade. What I didn't know then was that they had already set the wheels in motion. While Jake was making his fancy presentations and dreaming up his tech fantasies, our parents were quietly meeting with lawyers and financial advisors, figuring out ways to access my share of the inheritance to fund his pipe dreams. I went home that night and pulled out the old business journals Grandma had given me, filled with her neat handwriting documenting every decision, every risk, every careful step she'd taken to build her empire. Always trust your gut, she'd written. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. My gut was screaming that this was all wrong. I just didn't realize yet how right that feeling was. I discovered the truth by accident. Isn't that how these things always happen? One random moment that changes everything you thought you knew about your family. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I'd stopped by my parents' house to drop off some old photos I'd found of Grandma. I still had a key. Mom had insisted I keep it because this will always be your home. The irony of that statement still makes me laugh bitterly. The house seemed empty when I walked in, but then I heard voices coming from Dad's study. I was about to call out when I caught a fragment of conversation that made me freeze in my tracks. Need to move quickly on this restructuring, an unfamiliar voice was saying. The longer we wait, the more complicated it becomes. I edged closer to the partially open door. Through the crack, I could see my parents sitting across from two men in suits. Papers were spread across Dad's mahogany desk, the desk where he used to help me with my math homework. "And you're sure this is legal?" Mom was asking, her voice tense. "There won't be any problems down the line?" One of the suits, a balding man with wire-rimmed glasses, shuffled some papers. "The trustee arrangement gives you considerable latitude, as long as we can demonstrate that these decisions are in the best interest of preserving the family business." "Which they are," Dad interrupted firmly. "Jake's vision for modernization is exactly what the business needs." The other suit, younger, sharper looking, cleared his throat. "Still, we should discuss the potential complications. Your daughter's portion of the inheritance." "She'll understand eventually," Mom said, but her voice wavered slightly. "This is for the good of the family. Jake's first venture didn't work out quite as planned, but this new idea..." My blood ran cold. First venture? They'd already given him money? My money? "The important thing," the balding lawyer continued, "is that we structure this properly. The remaining funds need to be transferred before..." I must have made some sound, because suddenly everyone in the room went quiet. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding. I needed to get out of there, needed time to process what I'd just heard. But as I turned to leave, I knocked over the small table in the hallway. The framed family photo it held crashed to the floor, the sound impossibly loud in the sudden silence. The study door flew open. 4 faces stared at me, expressions ranging from shock to guilt to carefully blank professionalism. Mom's hand flew to her throat, her tell when she's caught in a lie. Dad just stood there, his face ashen. I started, but what could I say? "Sorry for catching you plotting to steal my inheritance." "Sweetheart." Mom stepped forward, her voice taking on that soothing tone she used when she was about to justify something terrible. "We were going to tell you." "Tell me what?" My voice sounded strange, distant. "Tell me that you've already given Jake money from my inheritance? Tell me that you're planning to give him the rest?" "It's not like that," Dad jumped in. "We're protecting the family's interests. The business needs to evolve." "The business was fine!" I shouted, surprising myself with the volume. "It was profitable. It was successful. Until you let Jake start playing entrepreneur with money he didn't earn." The younger lawyer started gathering papers, clearly uncomfortable. The balding one just watched the scene unfold with professional detachment, like he'd seen this kind of family implosion before. "You don't understand." Mom's voice was pleading now. "Jake has such wonderful ideas. He just needs proper funding to make them work. This new project..." "How much?" I cut her off. "How much of my inheritance have you already given him?" The silence that followed was deafening. Mom looked at Dad. Dad looked at the lawyers. Nobody wanted to say the number. Finally, the balding lawyer cleared his throat. Perhaps we should reschedule this meeting. How much? Dad's shoulders sagged. The first venture required $800,000. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Almost $1 million gone. Probably blown on Jake's half-baked tech dreams and market research that consisted of buying the latest gadgets for himself. And now you're planning to take the rest, I said quietly. It wasn't a question. I'd heard enough of their conversation to know the truth. We're doing what's best for the family, Mom insisted, tears in her eyes. But I noticed she didn't deny it. I looked at the broken family photo on the floor. All of us smiling at some long-ago Christmas. Grandma in the middle, her arms around both Jake and me. What would she think if she could see us now? I don't think we have the same definition of family anymore, I said, and walked out the door. I spent the next 24 hours in a daze, alternating between numbness and rage. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those papers spread across Dad's desk, heard Mom's voice saying Jake's vision over and over like a broken record. When Jake's call came the next evening, I almost didn't answer. But something in me needed this confrontation. Needed to hear them try to justify what they'd done. Family meeting. Now. His voice was sharp, entitled. Mom and Dad told me what happened yesterday. You need to stop being dramatic about this. I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. Dramatic? Is that what we're calling it when someone objects to having their inheritance stolen? Just come over. We need to talk about this like adults. Like adults. Rich coming from someone who'd never acted like one in his life. I drove to my parents' house in a fog of anger. The same house where I'd helped Grandma bake cookies every Sunday. The same house where she'd taught me about profit margins and inventory management while Jake played video games upstairs. Now it felt like a crime scene. They were waiting in the living room. Mom, Dad, and Jake. A perfect little tableau of family betrayal. Jake was sprawled in Grandma's favorite armchair, scrolling through his phone. He didn't even look up when I walked in. Sit down, honey. Mom patted the couch beside her. Like this was just another family chat. Like they hadn't been caught red-handed trying to steal my future. I remained standing. Let's talk about how much of my inheritance you've already given away. That's not fair, Dad jumped in. We're managing the inheritance for both of you. The trustee arrangement gives you the right to steal from me and give everything to Jake? Nobody's stealing anything. Mom's voice rose. Family helps family. Jake's ventures are an investment in all our futures. Ventures? I spat the word. You mean the first failed business that burned through $800,000? What was it, Jake? Bitcoin? NFTs? Or just a shopping spree at the Apple Store for your market research? Finally, Jake looked up from his phone. You're just jealous because I have vision, and you don't. All you want to do is run Grandma's stores exactly the same way forever, like some kind of museum. Those museum pieces turned a profit every single year. They put you through college. Not that you ever appreciated it. The world is changing. Jake stood up, his face flushed. But you're too scared to change with it. You've always been jealous of me. Always trying to make me look bad in front of Grandma. I stared at him, incredulous. Make you look bad? You did that all by yourself. Every time you refused to work, every time you blew off family obligations, every time you treated her business like your personal piggy bank. That's enough, Dad's voice boomed. We're not here to rehash the past. We're here to discuss the future. The business needs to evolve, and Jake has real ideas. Real ideas? I cut him off. Like the AI store that would alienate all our regular customers? Or does he have an even better way to burn through my money? It's not just your money, Mom's voice had that shrill edge again. The inheritance belongs to both of you, and as trustees, we have to make decisions that benefit everyone. Benefit everyone? Or just benefit Jake? A heavy silence fell. Mom and Dad exchanged glances. Jake smirked, clearly feeling untouchable. "Look," Dad finally said, his voice deliberately calm. "What's done is done. The first venture didn't work out, but Jake has learned from that experience. This new project is much more promising. We're not asking for your permission." "Of course you're not. You never intended to ask for my permission. You were just going to take everything and hope I wouldn't find out until it was too late." "We're still your parents," Mom said, tears welling up. "Everything we do is because we love you both." "No," I said quietly. "Everything you do is because you love Jake. I'm just the backup plan. The responsible one you can always count on to clean up his messes." "That's not true," but Mom couldn't meet my eyes. "Isn't it? Tell me, if the situations were reversed, if I had blown through Jake's inheritance on failed business ventures, would you be so understanding? Would you be planning to give me his share too?" The silence that followed was all the answer I needed. "That's what I thought." I turned to leave, then stopped. You know what the saddest part is? Grandma saw this coming. That's why she put the trustee age at 30. She was trying to protect us, from ourselves, from each other. But she never imagined you'd be the ones we needed protection from. I walked out of that house for the last time, leaving behind the sound of Mom's sobs and Jake's angry protestations. The truth was finally out in the open, ugly and undeniable. They had chosen their side. Now it was time for me to choose mine. After the confrontation, I spent a week researching estate lawyers. I made appointments with 3 different firms, each one supposedly specializing in inheritance disputes. I was ready to fight. Ready to protect what Grandma had meant for me to have. The first lawyer's office was in a sleek downtown building, all glass and chrome. She listened to my story with practiced sympathy, taking neat notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me with what I now recognize as pity. "Let me be clear about something," she said carefully. "Your parents, as trustees, have significant legal latitude in how they manage these assets. The language in the will, about managing the inheritance for the benefit of the business, gives them considerable flexibility." "But they're clearly favoring my brother," I protested. "They've already given him almost $1 million of my share." She sighed. "The problem is proving that these decisions weren't made in good faith. Your brother's ventures, however ill-advised, could be argued as attempts to modernize and grow the business. Your parents can claim they were acting in the business's best interests." The second lawyer was even more direct. "They've covered their tracks well," he said, examining the documents I'd managed to gather. "Every transfer, every decision, it's all been structured to appear as legitimate business investment. Challenging this would be expensive, time-consuming, and frankly, the chances of success are slim." But it was the third lawyer who delivered the knockout blow. An elderly man who'd been practicing estate law for 40 years, he didn't sugarcoat anything. "Your parents have already transferred most of your inheritance into various business entities controlled by your brother," he explained, peering at me over his reading glasses. "The remaining assets are being moved into investment vehicles that on paper are meant to benefit the family business. Fighting this would cost more than what's left of your inheritance." "So they've won," I said numbly. "They can just take everything and give it to Jake, and there's nothing I can do about it." He leaned back in his chair, his expression sympathetic but resigned. "Sometimes the cost of fighting exceeds the cost of accepting loss. Your parents had good lawyers. They knew exactly what they were doing." I thought about the men in suits I'd seen in Dad's study. They'd planned this meticulously, probably for months. While I was trusting my family to do the right thing, they were figuring out how to legally rob me. When I got home that night, there was a message from Mom on my phone. Her voice was honey sweet, like nothing had happened. "Sweetheart, Jake is starting his new venture next week. He's very excited about it. We should all have dinner to discuss the future of the business." The future of the business. The business Grandma had built with decades of hard work. The business that was supposed to be my legacy, too. Now it would become whatever tech fantasy Jake dreamed up next, funded by my stolen inheritance. I deleted the message without responding. The next day, Dad showed up at my apartment. He had that reasonable, fatherly expression he used to wear when explaining why Jake deserved special treatment. "We need to move forward as a family," he said, standing in my doorway. "What's done is done. Jake's new venture is going to change everything. If you'd just give it a chance." "How much is left?" I interrupted. "Of my inheritance? How much haven't you given to Jake yet?" He shifted uncomfortably. "That's not the point. We're trying to grow the business, make it stronger." "How much?" His silence was answer enough. "Get out," I said quietly, "and tell Mom and Jake to stop calling me." "Don't be like this," he pleaded. "Family has to stick together. Your grandmother would want—" "Don't you dare tell me what Grandma would want." My voice shook with rage. She wanted the business split equally. She wanted it protected until we were 30. She trusted you to be fair. He looked down at his shoes. "Sometimes parents have to make hard decisions. Someday, when you have children, you'll understand." "I understand perfectly. You've chosen your golden child. You've given him everything. My inheritance, my future, my share of Grandma's legacy. Just own it. Stop pretending this is about family or business or anything except Jake getting whatever Jake wants." He left without another word. I closed the door and slid down against it, feeling utterly defeated. All the legal knowledge in the world couldn't help me now. They'd won, and they knew it. That night, I pulled out Grandma's old business journals again. "Always have a backup plan," she'd written. "Sometimes the path you thought you'd take gets blocked, and you have to find another way forward." Looking at her neat handwriting, I made a decision. They'd stolen my inheritance, but they couldn't steal my determination. They couldn't steal the lessons Grandma had taught me. It was time to find another way forward. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to let someone break you. After accepting that my inheritance was gone, I threw myself into my career with an intensity that would have made Grandma proud. I had a decent job at a marketing firm, but I'd always played it safe, staying in my comfort zone. Now, with nothing left to lose, I started taking risks. I volunteered for the challenging projects nobody else wanted. Stayed late studying industry trends. Came in early to learn from our senior staff. My boss noticed. 3 months after the inheritance debacle, she called me into her office. I thought she was going to complain about the hours I was putting in, but instead, she offered me a promotion. Senior account manager with a substantial raise. "You've changed," she said. "There's a hunger in you now, a drive I haven't seen before." She wasn't wrong. Losing my inheritance had lit a fire under me. Every time I felt like giving up, I'd remember Mom and Dad's dismissive attitudes, Jake's smug face. It fueled me. Meanwhile, Jake's new venture was already showing cracks. He'd used my stolen inheritance to launch what he called a revolutionary retail AI platform. In reality, it was a buggy app that kept crashing and mischarging customers. The few store owners who'd agreed to test it were already demanding refunds. I heard about the problems through industry gossip. Our firm actually handled marketing for some retail clients, and Jake's failed technology had become a cautionary tale. No one mentioned my connection to him. I'd never talked about my family at work. 6 months into my new role, I started noticing opportunities beyond my day job. Our clients often complained about the gap between marketing promises and technical delivery. There was a niche there, waiting to be filled. I started freelancing on the side, helping small businesses integrate their marketing and technology needs. Nothing fancy, just practical solutions that actually worked. The opposite of Jake's grandiose, failing schemes. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Jake was burning through my inheritance trying to revolutionize retail with AI, I was building a real business the way Grandma had. One client at a time, solving real problems, delivering real value. My side business grew steadily. I reinvested every penny of profit, remembering Grandma's lessons about sustainable growth. By the end of the first year, I had enough clients to consider going full-time. Then came the news that Jake's venture had completely imploded. He'd burned through not just my inheritance, but also a significant portion of his own. The app had critical security flaws that exposed customer data. The few stores still using it were threatening lawsuits. Mom called me in tears. "Your brother is devastated," she sobbed. "He put everything into this business. He just needs one more chance. Maybe if you could talk to some of your business contacts." I let her message go to voicemail. A week later, Dad tried. "We know things have been difficult," he said in his message. "But Jake has learned from his mistakes. He has a new idea." Delete. Jake himself never reached out. I heard through family friends that he was blaming everyone else for his failure. The developers he'd hired, the store owners who didn't understand his vision, the customers who weren't ready for innovation. Meanwhile, my own business was thriving. I'd hired 2 employees and moved into a small office space. We weren't revolutionizing anything, but we were helping real businesses solve real problems, just like Grandma had done. The final straw for Jake's venture came when one of the larger stores affected by his app's security breach decided to sue. Suddenly, all those carefully structured business entities my parents had created to protect his failures were under legal scrutiny. I heard Mom and Dad had to dip into their retirement savings to help him settle the lawsuit. They were still defending him, of course. "He was just trying to innovate," Mom told anyone who would listen. "He just needs one more chance." But watching from a distance, I felt something unexpected. Peace. The anger that had driven me for the past year was fading, replaced by a quiet satisfaction. They had taken my inheritance, but they couldn't take my work ethic, my determination, or the real lessons Grandma had taught me. One evening, as I was locking up the office, I found myself smiling at the simple sign on the door, my company name and logo. It wasn't an empire like Grandma had built, at least not yet. But it was mine, earned through hard work rather than handed down and stolen. I touched the sign gently, remembering Grandma's words. "Success tastes sweetest when you earn it yourself." She was right, as usual, and somewhere I hoped she was proud of me for finally understanding what she'd been trying to teach us all along. Life has a way of coming full circle. It was exactly 2 years after the inheritance drama when my office receptionist told me my mother was in the lobby. I hadn't seen her since that final confrontation, though she'd left countless voicemails over the months, each one carefully deleted without being heard. I almost told the receptionist to send her away. But curiosity got the better of me. What could possibly bring her here, to my business, after all this time? She looked older than I remembered, worn down. The designer clothes and perfect makeup couldn't hide the worry lines around her eyes. She stood in my office doorway, clutching her expensive handbag like a shield. "You've done well for yourself," she said, looking around at my office. Her voice held a note of surprise, as if she couldn't quite believe I'd succeeded without their help. "What do you want, Mom?" She sank into one of my client chairs, her composure cracking. It's everything. The lawsuits from Jake's business failures keep coming. The legal fees. And now the bank is threatening foreclosure on the house. Of course. They weren't here because they missed me. They were here because they needed something. Jake's latest venture, she continued, dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. It had so much potential. But the investors pulled out at the last minute. If we could just get a small loan to tide us over. How much have you already lost? I asked quietly. She wouldn't meet my eyes. The house is underwater. Your father's retirement account is empty. We had to sell most of our investments. And Jake? He's taking it hard. He's back home now. The stress was too much for him to handle a regular job. He needs time to regroup. I almost laughed. Of course he did. Heaven forbid Jake actually work for a living. Where is he getting money for his daily expenses? I already knew the answer, but I wanted to hear her say it. We help him where we can. He's going through a difficult time. The same old excuses. The same old pattern. Jake fails, parents bail him out, repeat ad infinitum. Except now they'd run out of money to enable him with. How much are you asking for? Her eyes lit up with hope. Just $50,000 to start. Once Jake's new idea takes off. New idea? I cut her off. After everything that's happened, you're still betting on Jake's ideas? He's learned from his mistakes, she protested. This time it's different. He has a plan for a cryptocurrency platform that... I held up my hand. Stop. Just... stop. You're still doing it. Still enabling him. Still believing his fantasies instead of facing reality. We're your parents, she said, her voice taking on that familiar guilt-tripping tone. After everything we've done for you. Everything you've done for me? Now I did laugh. You stole my inheritance. You gave everything to Jake. And now that he's burned through it all, you want me to give him more? We're family, she insisted. Family helps family. Funny how that only applies when Jake needs help. Where was that family loyalty when you were stealing my inheritance? She flinched. We didn't steal. We were trying to support Jake's dreams. And now his dreams have turned into your nightmare. The house is being foreclosed, Dad's retirement is gone, and Jake is sitting at home planning his next failure. Tell me, Mom, was it worth it? Tears spilled down her cheeks, smearing her expensive mascara. Please, we don't know what else to do. Your father is talking about having to work at a grocery store to make ends meet. Maybe that would be good for him. Honest work. Like what Grandma did when she started out. How can you be so cruel? We're your parents. And I was your daughter. Past tense. You made your choice 2 years ago. You chose Jake. Now you get to live with that decision. She stood up, anger replacing the tears. So that's it? You're just going to let your family suffer? My family? I gestured around the office. This is my family now. The people who work here, who depend on me to make good decisions. I'm not going to risk their livelihoods on Jake's latest scheme. He's your brother. No, Mom. He's your son. Your problem. Not mine. She left in tears, but I knew it wouldn't be the last attempt. They were desperate now, and desperate people don't give up easily. Sure enough, Dad showed up the next day. Then Jake called my business line. Then Mom tried again. Each time the message was the same. Family helps family. We're your parents. He's your brother. Remember how Grandma believed in helping family. But I remembered something else Grandma had said. Don't set yourself on fire to keep others warm. They'd made their choices. Now they could live with the consequences. They say karma takes its time, but when it finally arrives, it comes with interest. 3 months after my mother's desperate visit to my office, I drove past my childhood home, and saw the foreclosure notice posted on the front door. The carefully maintained lawn that had been my mother's pride was overgrown, and Dad's prized rose bushes were wilting from neglect. I didn't stop. There was nothing there for me anymore. A week later, the family gossip network went into overdrive. My parents had been forced to sell the house at a significant loss, thanks to the multiple liens against it from Jake's failed business ventures. They'd moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment, all they could afford now that their credit was ruined. Jake naturally moved with them. After all, where else could he go? He had no money, no job, and a trail of business failures that made him unemployable in any serious capacity. But still, he wasn't looking for regular work. That would be beneath his potential. The news came in bits and pieces, mostly through well-meaning family friends who thought I should know how my family was doing. Aunt Sarah called to tell me that Mom was selling her designer handbags on consignment. Uncle Pete mentioned that Dad had indeed taken that grocery store job, night shift manager, the only place that would hire him after the lawsuits. Maybe you could help them out, these friends would suggest gently, just until they get back on their feet. But I knew better. There would be no getting back on their feet as long as they continued enabling Jake. He was already talking about his next big idea, something involving artificial intelligence and virtual reality. The same old story, just with fancier buzzwords. The breaking point came when Jake showed up at my office unannounced one afternoon. He looked different. His designer clothes were wrinkled, his hair unkempt. But the entitled attitude was exactly the same. "Look," he said, dropping into my client chair without being invited. "I know we've had our differences, but I've got this amazing new opportunity. It's guaranteed to be huge. I just need some startup capital." I let him talk, watching as he gesticulated wildly, throwing around terms he clearly didn't understand. Machine learning, blockchain, neural networks, the same old Jake, always chasing the next big thing, never willing to do the actual work. "Are you done?" I asked when he finally paused for breath. "Done? I'm just getting started. This could be huge for both of us. With your business experience and my vision—" "No, Jake. I mean, are you done pretending? Done acting like you didn't steal my inheritance? Done pretending you have any right to ask me for anything?" His face darkened. "That's ancient history. Mom and Dad made those decisions, not me. And anyway, you're doing fine. Look at this place." He gestured around my office. "While I've lost everything—" "You haven't lost everything, Jake. You can't lose what you never earned. You stole my inheritance and burned through it. Now you want more? The answer is no." "You're so selfish!" he exploded, showing his true colors. "You've always been jealous of me. Just because you have some small-time business, you think you're better than me?" "Better? Number just different. I believe in earning what I have. You believe in taking what others have earned. That's the difference between us." "Mom and Dad are suffering because of you," he shouted. "They lost everything trying to help me, and now you won't lift a finger." "They lost everything trying to help you?" I repeated slowly. "Say that again, but slowly." He stormed out, slamming the door so hard my degrees rattled on the wall. But he'd said the truth without realizing it. They had lost everything trying to help him. Their house, their savings, their retirement, their dignity. All sacrificed on the altar of Jake's ego. The next day, Mom called. "Your brother told us what you said," she began, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. "How could you be so cruel? He's finally ready to make something of himself." "Like he was ready the last 5 times?" I asked quietly. "How many times are you going to let him fail before you realize he doesn't want to succeed? He just wants to play entrepreneur with other people's money." "He needs a real chance." "No, Mom. He needs consequences. He needs to learn that actions have repercussions, but he never will as long as you and Dad keep cushioning his falls. So you're just going to let your family suffer? Her voice cracked. We're living in a tiny apartment. Your father is working nights at a grocery store. Is that what you want? What I want doesn't matter anymore. This is what you chose. You chose Jake over me, over financial security, over everything. Now you get to live with that choice. I hung up and blocked her number. Then I blocked Dad's number. Then Jake's. The sweet taste of justice isn't in watching others suffer. It's in finally being free of the obligation to care. Success hits different when you've built it from nothing. 3 years after the inheritance drama, I stood in front of my new office building, a renovated warehouse in the business district. The sign above the door read, Miller Digital Solutions, and seeing my grandmother's name there filled me with a mix of pride and bittersweet nostalgia. I'd thought long and hard about using the Miller name. Part of me worried it would attract more unwanted attention from my family. But then I remembered what Grandma always said, never let anyone steal your pride in who you are. The building wasn't just an office, it was a statement. While Jake had tried to revolutionize retail with fancy apps and AI, I'd built something real. We specialized in practical technology solutions for small businesses, the kind of businesses Grandma had dedicated her life to running. My team had grown to 15 people, each one hired because they shared the values Grandma had taught me. Work hard, be honest, solve real problems, take care of your people. The conference room wall displayed Grandma's business principles, carefully transcribed from her old journals. Know your customers by name. Quality is remembered long after price is forgotten. Never promise what you can't deliver. Treat your employees like family, the good kind of family. That last one always made me smile, somewhat ironically. Word of our success had spread through the business community. We weren't the biggest or the flashiest, but we were reliable, trustworthy, just like Grandma's stores had been. One morning, as I was reviewing quarterly reports, my assistant buzzed me. There's a Mrs. Henderson here to see you. She says she knew your grandmother? My heart skipped a beat. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly widow who used to come to Grandma's store every morning for her newspaper. I hadn't seen her since the stores had been sold off to pay Jake's debts. She looked exactly the same, down to her perfectly set silver hair and sensible shoes. When she saw me, her eyes welled up. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled of lavender and memories. "Your grandmother would be so proud of you." We sat in my office and she told me how she'd seen our company name in the business journal. "I knew it had to be you," she said. "You were always the one who understood what Margaret was trying to build." She told me how the new owners of Grandma's stores had changed everything. Automated checkouts, no more personal service, no more house accounts for trusted customers. "It's efficient," she admitted, "but it's not the same. There's no heart in it anymore." That conversation sparked something in me. The next day, I called a team meeting. "We're going to start a new initiative," I announced. "The Margaret Miller Small Business Fund." The idea was simple but powerful. We would take a portion of our profits and create a fund to help small business owners who needed technology solutions but couldn't afford them. Not loans, not investments, just help. The way Grandma used to help struggling families with their groceries. We started small, helping a local bakery set up a proper inventory system. Then a family-owned hardware store that needed a point-of-sale system. A neighborhood bookstore that wanted to compete with online retailers. Each project was selected based on Grandma's criteria. Honest people working hard to build something real. No get-rich-quick schemes. No fancy startups chasing the next big thing. Just solid businesses that needed a helping hand. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Jake had burned through millions trying to revolutionize retail with his half-baked ideas, I was actually helping small retailers survive in the digital age. Not with flashy AI or cryptocurrency, but with practical solutions that actually worked. One day, I received a letter from Mr. Peterson, Grandma's old lawyer. He'd heard about the Margaret Miller Fund and wanted to share something with me. "Your grandmother knew this might happen," he wrote. "She saw the patterns in your family long before anyone else did. The trustee arrangement wasn't just about waiting until you were 30. It was her attempt to protect you both from your parents' tendency to favor Jake." He included a copy of a letter Grandma had written years ago, never sent. In it, she expressed her concerns about how Jake was being raised, about how my parents' indulgence would harm him in the long run. She'd watched it happen with my father's siblings, seen how unearned privilege had destroyed their work ethic. "But you," she'd written, "you understand what matters. You see the value in hard work, in building something real. That's the true inheritance I want to leave you. Not money, but wisdom." I framed that letter and hung it in my office, right next to our company's mission statement. Every time I looked at it, I was reminded that I hadn't lost my inheritance after all. I'd gotten the most valuable part: Grandma's lessons, her principles, her wisdom. Money can be stolen, but legacy, real legacy, that's earned, not given. And nobody can take that away. They say desperate people make desperate choices. 4 years after I'd cut ties with my family, my parents made one final attempt to manipulate me. This time, they brought out the nuclear option: Grandma's memory. It started with a package delivered to my office. Inside was Grandma's old recipe box, the one that used to sit on her kitchen counter. The accompanying note, in Mom's perfect handwriting, read, "Found this while cleaning out storage." Remember all those Sundays baking with your grandmother? Family meant everything to her. She would be heartbroken to see us so divided. I ran my fingers over the worn metal box, remembering countless Sunday afternoons measuring flour and learning business lessons over cookie dough. But the memory was tainted now, used as a weapon in their endless manipulation. The recipe box was just the opening salvo. Next came the photos, carefully curated snapshots of happier times. Grandma and me at my high school graduation, the whole family at Christmas before everything fell apart, Jake and me as kids, back when I still believed in the idea of brotherly love. Then came the letter. 3 pages of Mom's elegant script, dripping with guilt and manipulation. "Your grandmother always said family was the most important thing," she wrote. "She built her business to leave a legacy for both her grandchildren. What would she think of how things have turned out? Of how you've turned your back on your family in our time of need?" I had to laugh at that. They were really going to use Grandma's memory to guilt me about family loyalty? The same people who had betrayed everything she stood for? But they weren't done. Dad showed up at my office next, carrying Grandma's old ledger from her first store. "Remember how she taught you to balance the books?" he asked, his voice heavy with manufactured nostalgia. "She always said you were the one who understood the business. The one who got it." "I remember," I said quietly. "I also remember how you gave everything to Jake, who never understood any of it." "We made mistakes," he admitted, but quickly added, "But family has to forgive. Your grandmother always said..." "Stop!" My voice was sharp enough to make him flinch. "Stop using her memory like this. Stop pretending you honored anything she stood for." "That's not fair. We're trying to..." "To what?" "To manipulate me using Grandma's memory? To guilt me into bailing out Jake again?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Your brother has a new opportunity. Something that could turn everything around. He just needs..." Let me guess. Startup capital? A small loan? A chance to prove himself? The same story. Different day. "He's changed," Dad insisted. "He's learned from his mistakes." Your grandmother would want. My grandmother would want? I stood up, anger finally boiling over. Let me tell you what Grandma would want. She would want the business she built through decades of hard work to be respected, not dismantled for Jake's pipe dreams. She would want her grandchildren to earn their success, not steal it from each other. She would want her family together, he interrupted. She would want us to support each other. Support? Like you supported me by stealing my inheritance? Like you supported her legacy by letting Jake destroy everything she built? He had the grace to look ashamed, but pressed on. We can't change the past, but we can move forward. As a family. It's what she would have wanted. No, I said firmly. What she wanted was for her grandchildren to have equal chances. What she wanted was for her business to be preserved. What she wanted was for her family to be honest and hardworking. You betrayed every single one of those wishes. But get out, Dad. And tell Mom to stop sending me Grandma's things. They're not weapons for you to use. They're reminders of everything you destroyed. He left, but I knew they weren't done. Sure enough, Jake called the next day. You know, he said, not even bothering with a greeting, Grandma always believed in second chances. She wouldn't want you to be so unforgiving. Grandma believed in earning second chances, I corrected him, not demanding them while refusing to change. I have changed. I have this new idea. I hung up, blocked his number. Again. That evening, I sat in my office looking at Grandma's recipe box. Inside, written on the back of an old sugar cookie recipe, I found a note in her handwriting I'd never noticed before. Remember, dear one, true family supports your growth, not your destruction. Don't let anyone use love as a chain. Even now, years later, she was still teaching me, still guiding me, still helping me see the truth. I took the recipe box home and put it with my other treasured memories of her. Not as a reminder of the family I'd lost, but of the wisdom I'd gained. Some people will use even the most sacred memories as tools of manipulation. The trick is not letting them succeed. 5 years after the inheritance battle, I stood on a stage at the local business awards, accepting the Entrepreneur of the Year award. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was exactly the kind of recognition Jake had always craved, but it had come to me through hard work, not stolen money. Miller Digital Solutions had grown beyond anything I could have imagined. We now employed 50 people, all of them sharing the values Grandma had instilled in me. Our client list included hundreds of small businesses across the state, and the Margaret Miller Small Business Fund had helped over 30 family-owned stores modernize and survive in the digital age. As I looked out at the audience, I saw Mrs. Henderson in the front row, beaming like a proud grandmother. Next to her sat several of our fund recipients, the young couple who'd turned their family bakery around, the immigrant family whose hardware store was now thriving, the elderly bookstore owner who could finally compete with online retailers. This was real success. Not the flash-in-the-pan schemes Jake had chased, but sustainable growth built on helping others succeed. I'd heard through the grapevine that Jake had finally taken a job as a sales associate at an electronics store. Not because he'd had some epiphany about honest work, but because he'd literally run out of other options. Mom and Dad were still working their retirement jobs, trying to rebuild some semblance of financial security. They'd stopped trying to contact me after that final attempt with Grandma's recipe box. Perhaps they'd finally realized that manipulating me with memories wouldn't work anymore. Or maybe they'd just run out of energy to keep trying. In my acceptance speech, I talked about Grandma's principles, the ones that had guided me even after losing my inheritance. Success isn't about having the most innovative idea, I said. It's about solving real problems for real people. It's about building something that lasts. After the ceremony, a young entrepreneur approached me. She was clutching a business plan and looking nervous. I heard about your fund, she said. I have a small coffee shop, been in my family for 3 generations. We need to modernize, but the banks won't help us. I smiled, remembering Grandma's words about giving people a chance when they're willing to work for it. We set up a meeting for the following week. That evening, I visited Grandma's grave for the first time in years. I'd avoided it before, not wanting to confront the pain of everything that had happened. But now, with the award in my hand, and her business principles thriving in a new generation, it felt right. I sat by her headstone and told her everything. About the business I'd built. About the fund helping small business owners. About Jake finally having to work for a living. About Mom and Dad facing the consequences of their choices. You tried to protect us with that trustee arrangement, I said to her granite marker. But maybe this was better. Maybe I needed to lose everything to truly understand what you were teaching me all along. The next morning, I called an all-hands meeting at the office. We're expanding the Margaret Miller Fund, I announced. And we're starting a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs. Real entrepreneurs, not get-rich-quick dreamers. The team was enthusiastic. Many of them had their own stories of family businesses, of watching parents or grandparents build something from nothing. They understood what we were trying to preserve. That afternoon, I received an unexpected email from Mr. Peterson, Grandma's old lawyer. He was retiring and cleaning out his files. He'd found an old document, Grandma's original business plan from 1980, written in her neat handwriting on yellowed paper. "Thought you should have this," he wrote. "You're the one who truly inherited her spirit." I framed that business plan and hung it in our lobby, right next to our company's mission statement. New clients often stopped to read it, amazed by how many of her principles still apply today. Sometimes I wonder if Jake ever thinks about what he lost. Not the money, but the chance to learn from Grandma's wisdom. If Mom and Dad ever regret choosing his empty dreams over her solid principles. But those aren't my concerns anymore. My family isn't defined by blood now, but by shared values. It's in the team that shows up early to help a struggling client. The business owners who support each other through tough times. The young entrepreneurs learning to build something real and lasting. That's the real victory. Not just surviving betrayal, but creating something better from its ashes. Not just making money, but making a difference. Looking back, losing my inheritance was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to earn my own success, to truly understand what Grandma had been teaching me all along. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting better.